So, obviously, I'm a little late to this one, but I just couldn't collect all my thoughts on this right after seeing it. In fact, you can say my mind was everywhere. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to my channel. Today we're talking about a newer release, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. Before we begin, let me know in the comments what your thoughts on this movie were, if you already saw it, or if you were planning on seeing it, and make sure to hit that thumbs up button if you like these reviews, as it helps me out immensely by getting my content out there. And if you're new here, I hope you consider hitting that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with more movie-related content like A24 reviews on a near-daily basis. But let's not waste any more time and let's talk about Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. This stars Michelle Yeoh as Evelyn, an aging immigrant who's swept up in an insane adventure where she alone can save the world by exploring other universes, connecting with the lives she could have led. This is co-directed by Daniel Kwan and Daniel Scheinert, better known together as Daniels, and it's their second film together after the absolutely bizarre Swiss Army Man, though Scheinert also directed on his own The Death of Dick Long, which I still haven't seen. And since its limited theatrical release in March, this is the movie that everyone has been talking about. Everyone who's seen this movie has absolutely raved about it, and it's become so beloved so quickly that it shortly became the highest rated movie ever on Letterboxd, displacing Parasite. And what's incredible is the fact that it's from A24, who, while arguably the biggest studio for independent film distribution, is known for picking up its share of films that don't always have the broadest appeal. But this has been one of those few exceptions, and not that that affected my hype necessarily, as I had this on my most anticipated movies of the year list, and I'm always interested in what A24 chooses to distribute, but it was nice to see a lot of people coming together and showing their love for this. And now that I've seen it, count me as one of those people, because I thought this was absolutely fantastic. Very rarely do I think something ultimately lives up to all the hype when it feels like it's being talked about non-stop and praised like it's the best thing ever, but this lived up to all the hype and then some. I was a big fan of Swiss Army Man, but this blew that out of the water. All I will say is, if you are of the belief that there are no original movies out there anymore, this should put that to rest for you. Like, no questions asked after this. Now, I was never the biggest fan of that argument to begin with. I get that there has been a bigger shift to more attention on IPs, but still, I didn't really agree with that argument. It was just, if anything, a lot more of the original stuff was more on the streaming and indie side of things. But here you go. A theatrical, high-concept, completely original film based off absolutely nothing. Now, it does explore the concept of the multiverse, something which we are seeing in the Marvel movies currently, and soon to be DC as well, but the way it's utilized here is for a completely different purpose. Because what this is ultimately looking to explore are the things that mean the most to us, and the people and the relationships that we take for granted. We see that as we explore the relationship between Evelyn and her husband Wayman, played by Kei Kwan, aka Short Round from Indiana Jones, as well as her daughter Joy, played by Stephanie Sue. We see that they live a pretty dull life, just running this rundown little laundromat, and Evelyn seems to ignore the unhappiness that Wayman feels, and she also doesn't take into consideration her daughter's feelings as she has difficulties accepting her girlfriend. And in this exploration of the multiverse, we get to see a lot of deviations from that, ranging from a life where Evelyn is a famous chef, or one where she doesn't marry Wayman and becomes a famous movie star, which essentially plays out like Michelle Yeoh's actual movie career. And there are plenty of other bizarre universes or eccentricities revealed in seemingly normal universes. And by the time I get to this review, a lot of you will probably have seen it by now, but I still don't want to get into spoilers as far as what those other universes entail, because I know there are still plenty out there who have not gotten to check this out yet, and I think this is the sort of film that's best experienced by going into it as spoiler-free as possible. But what I will say is, all of these explorations aren't just for visual eye candy and to explore the endless possibilities just for the sake of it, but a lot of these moments do circle back to the main Evelyn's own character development and the arc surrounding her family, and these are used as a way to put things into perspective regarding who and what we value. And it's actually quite profound. The film does such a seamless job of blending in so many different styles, tones, and genres, taking inspiration from so many other movies and mixing them into something that could be moving, entertaining, and very funny. It's divided up into 3 chapters, all 3 of which have very different runtimes. The first is titled Everything, the second Everywhere, and the third All at Once. The first chapter follows the closest thing we get to a singular story, as we get introduced to the multiverse and the rules of how one can jump from universe to universe, which feels like something out of a video game, but it's still mainly focused on the main version of Evelyn. And the second chapter is when it focuses even more intently on the splitting of all these different directions, while the third ties it all together. And despite the runtime for each chapter being split unevenly, and despite each chapter taking on a vastly different approach, you never once feel that runtime, maybe outside of a very brief moment here and there. I've heard some people say that the movie's one fault is that maybe it goes into one direction too many, and that causes it to go on for slightly longer than it should, and while I can get where they're coming from, it didn't really bother me all that much. Any sequence that might go on for, say, a touch too long, it'll only be by very little before it jumps to the next thing. And believe me when I say, this jumps in a lot of different directions. As I said, we do follow the journeys of several other versions of Evelyn throughout the film, but it isn't like just some passing reference. Part of the plot involves Evelyn having to travel to these different universes to gain some new skill from other versions of herself. But even once she does, we do repeatedly cut back and forth between the main storyline and each of the storylines of whatever the other Evelyns are going through. And they don't feel like tangents. Some of them can be quite funny, while others can be pretty emotional, but all of them draw some parallels to whatever it is that the Evelyn in the main universe is experiencing. They don't follow the same dramatic beats, but in some way thematically, they're all linked, and I thought that was absolutely brilliant in the way in which it was handled. And I applaud the editing done by Paul Rogers to tie a lot of it together, because the cuts we get between some of these universes will feel rapid fire. Now, it's not disorienting. It doesn't cut so frequently that we're constantly only just on one universe for a few seconds or anything, but there are some cuts where it'll be this major dramatic beat, and it might link all the Evelyns from all these universes together for just this one moment. And we do get a few brief instances here and there where it just quickly cuts through these facial expressions at such breakneck speed. It won't be that way for every single scene, but it is that way for a few brief moments, and it's incredible for just how seamless it felt, especially whenever it's done in the midst of some action scene, because that's also worth pointing out. Despite being big on family drama, this also has its fair share of action scenes, and similar to what I've said about this movie as a whole, they take on many different styles. Some have a clear martial arts influence, going back to Michelle Yeoh's days of stuff like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, but some are played for laughs. Like, there's an entire scene that felt like it was something out of one of the Jackass movies, while another of the film's best moments involves Kei Kwan and a fanny pack, and that's all I'll say about that. And speaking of that cast, everyone here does a phenomenal job. It's great we've been getting Michelle Yeoh in so many good roles over these last few years, but this one might just take the cake for her best yet. She's juggling so many different variants of Evelyn, and each feels so distinct from one another, each either bringing us a sense of tragedy or at times a fun sense of humor. She's always been great, and she's had fairly prominent roles all throughout her career, but I hope she's in many more starring roles such as this moving forward. Though Kei Kwan has to be the biggest surprise of them all. Not that I ever disliked the guy, but he also hasn't been in a major role in 20 years outside of last year's Finding Ohana on Netflix. And he was just known as this charming child actor from Temple of Doom and The Goonies. And he definitely brings that same charm to him here all these years later, but with that, he also brings so much more emotional depth. And it's a shame after seeing this that we missed out on so many great performances from him for all these years, because the story behind his absence was that he was struggling to find work as an adult and he found there to be a lack of representation for major Asian characters until he was inspired by the success of Crazy Rich Asians. And now, seeing him at arguably his A game here, I truly can't wait to see what else is in store for him. Stephanie Hsu is also a nice addition to the cast, who has quite possibly one of the wildest arcs in the film, but it's one that also plays a big part in the film's emotional core, which I won't reveal, but we get introduced to a few of the film's strangest major plot points through her, yet the way she handles it all, blending it in with some truly existential themes that are at the heart of the movie, it blew me away. Again, Another one I'm looking forward to see pop up in a lot more films, because she was fantastic, and all of her scenes with Michelle Yeoh in particular were masterful. And then it's also just nice to see other great veteran actors like Jamie Lee Curtis and James Hong pop up in supporting roles. This is probably the most badass we've seen Jamie Lee Curtis, who in the main universe is this nasty IRS lady that attempts to shut down the laundromat, but her involvement in some of the alternate dimensions gives her a lot of cool things to do. And Hong, now at 93 years old, also manages to light up the screen whenever we do get to see him as Evelyn's dad, especially in one of his variant forms, and he was just an absolute blast. And to go back to something I mentioned earlier about this being a little strange, that odd sensibility is definitely on display here. That's something that was also on display in Swiss Army Man, and it's certainly cranked up a lot more in this film. And I know for those who aren't always the biggest A24 fans, that a lot of the films they tend to pick up have something offbeat about them. Like, this gets very high concept and it gets out there. But I also wouldn't let that deter you from seeing this, because despite the blending of so many eccentric plot points and mashing together some unlikely genres that you wouldn't think would go together, it's still ultimately palatable by the end of the day. I never found this to be a film that's style over substance. It certainly has a lot of visual flair to it, and there is a hyperactive energy to it that can sometimes feel like it's nonstop, but it's also not so disorienting or so out there that it just gets lost in whatever flashy imagery it's looking to show off. Like I said, at its heart is a very emotional story with a lot of profound themes that I think will cut you pretty deep. It never loses sight of having a coherent story or character development. There are still defined arcs with nothing left too ambiguous or open-ended, and there's still a sense of emotional satisfaction at the end of the day, and that's also why I enjoy this so much. There are times where a film can lose sight of its storytelling aspects because it's trying to do something really cool stylistically, and with a film like this, you'd think it would come across as self-indulgent for the amount of directions it goes in, but I never once got that. I found this to not just be stylistic entertainment, but also a very deep and relatable story. Everything Everywhere All at Once is nothing short of a masterpiece, and I do not use that word lightly. It's the rare film that manages to make a lot of bold stylistic choices and go in so many different directions, yet it never feels like it's unfocused or self-serving. In fact, it uses such ambitious ideas to discuss deeply profound and existential topics that we'll be able to relate to in some way. It's one part hilarious comedy, one part emotional drama, one part sci-fi action adventure, among many, many other things, and this is the one film this year you definitely don't want to miss. Everything Everywhere All at Once gets a 10 out of 10. My first 10 out of 10 of the year. Now, the question is, will it be the only one? If it only took till April to get one of these, I think it's a sign of a pretty strong year, so I'm really excited to see what else is in store this year. But let me know, did you see Everything Everywhere All at Once, or are you planning to see it, and what were your thoughts? Did you think the story worked at all, or was it too out there for you? Let me know in the comments below so we can discuss. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, and share it, and for more movie reviews and film discussion, please make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Thanks for watching everyone, and keep having fun with film.